The Best Way to Explain It, Episode 27. Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of The Best Way to Explain It, the podcast that is often called the lotion-infused tissue of podcast.
All right, which lotion are we talking about before I get offended that you're, saying that Vicks infused Kleenex is not the greatest thing that's ever happened to you?
Oh, no. Actually, this was a positive analogy.
Oh, this was a positive analogy.
Dude,
okay.
Why would you get any
great.
other kinds of tissues other than the lotion-infused ones?
You used way too many lotion-infused tissues, and now your nose and upper lip is too soft.
These are the that's my cross to bear,
It's your scarlet letter. It's your pearl of great
Mm-hmm.
shame, or whatever that phrase is.
I don't know. I'm terrible at idioms. But
I'm trying to quote the Scarlet Letter because the Scarlet Letter talks about the pearl of great price is what I'm talking about. It's a biblical reference within the Scarlet Letter. Huh. Wow.
I don't know if I've ever read the Scarlet Letter.
So much knowledge dropped within the first 2 minutes of an episode.
You're so good.
Yeah.
I've seen the movie Easy A with Emma Stone. Which talks about the Scarlet Letter.
Yeah, it's an analogy to the Scarlet Letter, but you're also very distracted by the fact that Emma Stone is so hot.
Her facial features are very appealing.
Yeah, that's what I was looking at.
Oh, you're terrible.
I meant her intelligence. What were you
right.
thinking?
Well, duh.
Ah.
Such a smart, independent, strong woman. Oh, you and your redheads.
That is true. I guess I do get a free pass at looking at redheads since they are rare. So
that's true. Are they really that rare?
Yeah, they're a dying breed, man.
Dying breed.
Dying breed.
Yeah, I went to my local zoo. We only have 3 of them left.
So my aunt is, I would call her a strawberry blonde. She'll probably call herself a redhead. And she got in a discussion with my girlfriend, for the listeners, who is like straight redhead. People think she dyes her hair orange. That's how red her hair is.
Yeah, it's pretty red.
Yeah. So anyway, they got in a discussion and they were talking about how redheads are a dying breed. And this has nothing to do with what we're talking about tonight, but the idea that a human breed or a type of human is
Can we
going
call them
out
something
of
else? I'm really uncomfortable
I don't
with
know.
this breed term.
I don't know what else. A human race, I guess. Redheads. I don't know.
I don't know.
Part of the human race
Recessive
is going
gene.
going out of breed. I just want to make you uncomfortable some more now.
We'll just roll with it. That's fine.
Oh, that's
but
great.
Considering this is a typical introduction to our show,
Yeah.
let's awkwardly transition into what we're actually going to talk about.
Dude, I don't think I have the time.
Ho ho.
Yeah.
What?
Ayo.
That's right. We're talking about time. Specifically, the philosophy of time.
Oh, yeah.
And even more specifically, the A theory of time.
You're getting even. You're digging an even deeper hole.
Yeah.
What does that even mean? Who thinks that time is different from another type of time?
There are 2 kinds of times.
There were the best of times and there were the worst of times.
That's what we're talking about.
It was the great epoch and it was the worst epoch, right?
Didn't get the second half of that reference.
Oh my
but okay.
goodness. It was still referencing A Tale of Two Cities, the very beginning. Wow.
Oh.
I am throwing out so many references and you're not catching them.
You are a Goldmine. You need to just send me a list of stuff I need to watch, and I'll do it.
It's not even something you need to watch. It's like you need to read the first chapter of A Tale of Two Cities by Charles Dickens, and then give up on
fiction
reading Charles Dickens because it's so boring.
Yeah, I'm not a big fiction guy, but I am a big nonfiction guy.
Yeah, and nonfiction comes with certain things like philosophy, right?
That's right.
And the philosophy of time.
That's correct. That's a good transition. Well done. 10 out of 10. So, we are going to be talking about the theories of time. So, I'm going to do 2 episodes on the theories of time. I promise it's just going to be 2. It's not going to be another, 6-episode series. Anyways, about the internet. But yeah, because there are primarily 2 theories of time, and we'll get into that a little bit later. But so, like I said, this is a area of philosophy, and for those of you who don't know, philosophers are those people who always try and take the concepts that we think we have, just down pat, and then they make you realize you actually have no idea what you're talking about or what something actually means. It's one of the reasons why I love talking about philosophy, because, it's really annoying to people who don't find it fascinating. But fortunately, Breckan finds it just as interesting as me, so I think we're going to be good to go as we talk about our topic of today, time, or more specifically, the A theory of time.
God, it feels like you've already been talking for an hour.
Hey, who knows? Maybe it's not been an hour. Time jokes.
Relativity jokes. Get wild.
So, yes, there are theories of time. That is what philosophers do, and scientists do have some stuff to say about it, but we'll talk about that later. So there are 2 theories to be exact. So there's different versions, obviously, of each of these 2 theories. Like there's sub-theories, and how people get when they have to specifically categorize certain ideas, but philosophers have generally classified all theories of time as falling into one of these 2 categories. Now, before I start talking about the A theory of time, you might be good to think about how you might define time without being circular. Breckan, how might you do that?
Well, I know the definition you're going to give, so I'm not going to steal it from you. How would I define time?
It's hard, isn't it?
Like, anytime you could ask me that. You asked me that 2 years ago. I have had 2 years, and every day goes by where I'm like, how would I classify time? Or how would I define time? And I still think, I have no idea.
Yeah, but you do know what it is. Everybody knows what it is, but it's tough to put into words. But there's actually a definition from a joke book, and it says that time is what keeps everything from happening at once. And, okay, it's not an entirely accurate or technical definition, but it does capture the essence of what time is, because time is about the order in which events happen. So there wouldn't be any time if everything happened at once. You can order events by the relations earlier than and later than, and also you'd need to define exactly what you mean by the notions of past, present, and future in order to articulate, when something occurs, which is a very important aspect of a theory of time. So another aspect of time that seems fairly intuitive is the sense that there needs to be change in order to have time. So if everything stayed exactly the way it was, would there really even be time? Because clocks and other measurements of time don't really help us here, because those require some sort of change in order to be useful, right? Because, there needs to be a change from, 10:29 to 10:30 in order to measure, what moment we're actually in. So on any theory of time, there needs to be some sort of meaning to each of these concepts, even if that means that, okay, these changes are actually just illusory, which some theories do hold to.
Yeah, that's the theory that Albert Einstein held to at least
I believe so, yeah.
a few times in his life. Yeah.
Or
which is it's awkward saying that, but yes. I believe Albert Einstein, one of his famous things is saying that the dividing line between past, present, and future is an illusion. So how does the A theory compare to that?
Well, the A theory would be the opposite of that.
Okay.
So the A theory is pretty well recognized as the common sense view of time. And that's not like a dig at the B theory, which is the other theory, in case you haven't caught on by now. It's just typically, it's how we usually experience time, how we might think of it. So what I mean by this is that temporal becoming, which is just, that just means things come into and out of being, is what temporal becoming means. So when a carpenter builds a table or builds a chair, that chair actually comes into, and then when it's destroyed, it actually goes out of being. So that is an actual real thing that happens. It's a real feature of reality. That's what temporal becoming is. That's what it means for temporal becoming to be real. And not only that, but there's also an objective now on the A theory of time. So that means that there is a privileged point on the timeline in which, stuff actually happens and actually exists. So on this view, tense is an objective feature of reality, which means that there are tensed facts about reality. Now, before you start, freaking out and saying, I have no idea what you're talking about, let's define some terms. So first of all, let's just define what facts are real quick. So facts are defined as the state of affairs described by a true declarative sentence. So the language that these facts are spoken in is unimportant if the state of affairs described is the same. So to say snow is white in English and also in German, they refer to the same fact or proposition, even though they're spoken in a different language.
Okay.
So tensed facts are facts that have to be located in relation to the present. So they utilize past, present, or future tense verbs, compounding verbs for more complex tenses such as past perfect or future perfect, or they utilize indexical expressions such as now, today, or tomorrow. Do you kind of get what tensed facts are?
Yeah, you're saying I had to take year 3 of Spanish to get them? Okay.
Pretty much. It'd be like... Oh, go for it.
No, so I joke about like having to take a different language to really understand this, but when you say something like past perfect or future perfect, what I think of is Spanish.
Right.
And within learning a different language, you learn that we tense verbs in a certain way. So past, is like Scott went and wrote this podcast,
right.
like something like that. Future would be like, this podcast is going to do extremely well. You don't realize you're saying it because it's your natural language. That's how you learned it until you learn another language, and they're saying stuff like that. So like, I just think it's interesting that time plays a role within language that you learn.
Yeah. Language is huge.
Yeah.
It has a lot of applications to theories of time. And I think your point about learning a different language, well, the reason we don't really think about it is because we learn English, through immersion.
Yeah.
We were immersed in the English language, and so we learn stuff because everybody else does it, but we don't really learn why we do things. Whereas like if you're learning Spanish in like a classroom, you learn why you should say certain things a certain way. And such you get concepts such as, past perfect or future perfect.
Yeah.
So that's what I mean by tensed facts, and we'll get more into what that means a little bit later. And so because tense is an objective feature of reality, this view is sometimes called the tensed theory of time. So if you see that, it means the same thing. And also because of the reality of temporal becoming, it's also been called the dynamic view of time. So that just means like things actually change, as opposed to the static view of time, which is the B theory. And again, you'll sometimes hear it called the A series of time, which refers to J.M.E. McTaggart's he's the first guy that really wrote a seminal work on theories of time. He had a little bit of a nutty view that time didn't actually exist, but we can get into that later if you guys want. And all of those names just refer to the same thing. So tensed, dynamic, A theory, A series, all of those mean the same thing. And so in a sense, things actually change and happen on the A theory of time, whereas on the B theory of time, everything exists statically with nothing ever really coming into or out of existence. So in this episode, I'm going to primarily focus on arguments in favor of the A theory of time, since I'll get to the B theory more in the next episode. And I just want to give credit where credit's due. A lot of this discussion comes from a book called Time and Eternity by a guy named Dr. William Lane Craig. He also wrote really large volumes on both the A and B theory of time, which I believe are called the tensed theory of time and the tenseless theory of time. And both of those books are really high-level academic books that I haven't read, mainly because they're $250 on Amazon. But if you'd like to pick them up, I'm sure they wouldn't mind, because they probably don't have many of them published.
Wait, you're saying that
what?
Those are like pocket change on Amazon?
Pretty much, yeah.
Cool.
I'm assuming they're so expensive it's just because they're an academic work and they didn't publish many of them, and to make it worth their while, they had to hike up the price. So anyways, full disclosure, Dr. Craig believes the A theory of time is the correct theory of time, and his book argues as such, and I haven't found any reason to think he's wrong, so I found his arguments pretty convincing, so I'll present them as objectively as I can, but just so you know, I do think this is the correct theory of time. But you guys can draw your own conclusions, because I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'm just here to tell you to think.
Ayo.
Oh.
Look at that. Look at that. I like that. I like that quote a lot. Retweet.
Retweet, guys. But okay, so A theory is like time is like, or tense is objective, so the only thing that exists is the now, whereas like the past doesn't actually exist and the future doesn't exist. Whereas in the B theory, everything exists in the same way. So the only reason we think of now as now is because we exist at now, whereas the people in 1950 also exist, whereas on the A theory, they wouldn't exist because they existed in the past. Does that kind of make sense?
Yeah. So we all exist at the same time. They touched on it in what's the movie? The famous movie? Come on, you got to know this.
Wow, that is an incredibly vague.
It is a vague
concept. Oh, Back to the Future?
No, well,
I don't know.
No,
Matthew time travel movies.
Matthew McConaughey.
Oh, Interstellar.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Man, my mind just blanked. I couldn't think of it, even though I have been listening to the soundtrack all this
soundtrack.
week. Yeah, it's so great. Anyway, like they touch on it in the scene where he like goes through this. They call it like a 6-dimensional time block, where who
knows what that was?
Yeah, he like floats through this time block where he can travel through time to communicate to his daughter in different eras of her life. So he communicates as she's a small child, as she progresses through her teenage years, as she becomes an adult, and she runs back and realizes that it's her father trying to communicate to her the like equations for developing what right. They say is like humans build a black hole. But sorry to get off track, but like that is what the B theory of time stipulates. Right. But we should get on that on another episode. Right. I won't distract too much.
That's a good point. If for those of you who have seen the movie, it requires a B theory of time, because on the A theory of time, his daughter wouldn't exist at that point in time, because that point in time has already passed. His daughter would only exist on the now, and so that's the main difference. So it's helpful to think of the B theory as like a 4-dimensional space-time block.
Yes.
In which every point is just as real, whereas on the A theory, there's just the one moment that is the now that is actually real, and that's pretty much the main difference.
Yeah.
So hopefully that's clear. If not, don't worry, it's a really complex topic that took me a really, really long time to understand. And so I recommend reading Dr. Craig's books on it in order to get a really good understanding of it, because he does a really nice job of laying out the debate. But with that being said, what are some reasons for thinking the A theory to be true? Well, if tense is an objective feature of reality, then it seems that the idea of tense needs to be crucial to the meaning of propositions. And again, propositions are just facts. And if you want to know this stuff, you guys pick up my logic course at thebestwaytoexplainit.com/logic. It's really helpful with a lot of more logically rigorous stuff. I explain a lot of this stuff in really good detail.
Yeah,
so go ahead and
do it. You hear a lot about how logic and reason are used throughout our society, but you don't, like, I had no idea what actual logic meant until I learned about philosophy and took philosophy courses and stuff. So
until you listen to my videos, right?
Yeah, I did that. I gotta go to the bathroom. Bye.
No, but that's a good point. Yeah, because you use logic every day. You just don't realize it. So I recommend doing that. But yeah, again, propositions are just facts. So in other words, if we can't eliminate tense from our language and it still means the same thing, then it seems reasonable to assume that tense is an objective feature of reality. So this is sometimes called the argument from the ineliminability of tense.
Wow, can you say that?
Ineliminability.
Can you say that like 5 times fast or something?
No,
I cannot.
Not.
Yeah, I'm glad you didn't take me up on that.
If I do, the argument automatically goes through. By the rules of logic.
It's an ineliminable fact, right?
Hey. Yeah, that just means if the argument from the crucialness of tense, it's crucial to the meaning of what we say.
Okay, cool.
So it goes something like this. So premise 1, tensed sentences apparently express tensed facts. Premise 2, the apparent expression of tensed facts by tensed sentences should be accepted as correct unless either A, tense sentences are shown to be translatable into tenseless sentences without any loss of meaning, or B, tensed facts are shown to be unnecessary for the truth of tensed sentences. So premise 3, tense sentences have not been shown to be translatable into tenseless sentences without any loss of meaning. Premise 4, tensed facts have not been shown to be unnecessary for the truth of tense sentences. And then premise 5, therefore the apparent expression of tensed facts by tense sentences should be accepted as correct. And if that's the case, then the A theory of time is correct.
Okay.
So basically this argument wants to show that if there are tensed facts about reality, then the tensed theory of time is true. Seems to make sense, right?
Yeah.
So, are the premises true? The argument is logically valid, so we have to examine the premises. Well, premise 1 is clearly true because tense sentences at least seem to express tensed facts. Otherwise, we wouldn't use tense sentences. We would use other kinds of sentences, right? So, at least on the surface, they apparently express some sort of fact that we would consider tensed. It's not to say that they do, it's just that they seem to. So premise 2 then says that in the absence of any reason to doubt the tense sentences express tense facts, we ought to accept that they do. And it also gives the 2 typical ways in which so-called detensors might escape this argument. And so if we can support both 3 and 4 of the argument, then the argument goes through, and 3 and 4 just deny the 2 escape routes given in premise 2. So premise 3 and 4 are really the crucial ones here. So the first escape route, which is just one of the sub-premises of premise 2, is usually called the old tenseless theory of language. And apparently it started with Bertrand Russell during the first decade of the 20th century. And basically it states that tense isn't a necessary feature of language, and if we really wanted to, we could just change how we talk in order to completely eliminate tense, right? Does that kind of make sense?
Yeah. I'm trying to think.
You don't have to lie.
Well, I'm trying to think of how we could translate past into what we would call present, but really is just like
tenseless.
She eats food, whereas she ate food.
Fortunately for you,
like that,
Fortunately for you, I've done so with a great example.
Right.
So first, let's take the tensed sentence. Breckan was in the hospital due to his lack of control over his diabetes.
Ouch.
Which is a true statement. So the detensor might say that this means the same exact thing as saying Breckan is in the hospital on I don't know, what date did you go to the hospital?
That's still tensed, though, isn't it? Or it is in the hospital on December 18th, I want to say.
December 18th, 2017. 28th, I didn't know.
Yeah, it's all good.
So they would say Breckan was in the hospital due to his lack of control over his diabetes would be the same thing as saying Breckan is in the hospital on December 28th, 2017 due to his lack of control over his diabetes. And that is in that sentence is a tenseless is. Okay. So they specify that is the case because it's not saying it's in relation to something else. It's saying there's some location on this 4-dimensional space-time block called December 18th, 2017, and that is when Breckan is in the hospital.
But you could be. You're stating a specific way that we describe time, which is a date, December 18th. So,
right, but does it mean the same thing? That's the question. Does it mean the same thing as saying Breckan was in the hospital due to his lack of control over his diabetes? That's what they would have to show. So that's one way of doing it, is to use dates and times. Another way to do it would be to use what is called a token reflexive expression. And what that would look like is to say Breckan is in the hospital earlier than this utterance being that sentence token that I just said. So does that kind of make sense? The two different ways they might remove tense from a sentence?
Okay.
So obviously the name of this theory implies that this approach does not work to remove tense from our language, since it really does seem to carry some meaning. I mean, it's the old tenseless theory of language. Clearly there's a new one because this one doesn't work. Because tensed sentences inform us in certain ways that the tenseless translations do not. So let's take the first example and change it just a little bit. So now we're going to say Breckan is in the hospital at 1 a.m. So that's a tenseless statement, right?
Yep.
So it's saying at some point on this 4-dimensional space-time block is a point in time called 1 a.m., and that is when Breckan is in the hospital.
Okay.
So if I were to be a good friend and say want to visit Breckan in the hospital, I would hold the belief that I need to visit Breckan after 1 a.m. Otherwise, you're not going to be there. So my visiting you or Breckan cannot be explained by my belief that Breckan is in the hospital at 1 a.m. because theoretically I've believed this all day. I've known you're going to be in the hospital at 1 a.m. all day.
Okay.
Because I just know who you are as a person and that you're terrible at taking care of your diabetes.
Hey. Now you're getting me believing in an A theory of time again because I want to say I was terrible at taking care of my diabetes.
Okay, so my visiting Breckan can't be explained by my belief that, because I have this one belief that Breckan is in the hospital at 1 a.m. But I believe that all day. So if that is the belief that spurs me to action to visit Breckan, then I should have visited Breckan at all points in time, because theoretically at all points in time I would have that belief, right? Or at least all the points in time that
or you would be motivated to.
Right.
Yeah.
But what actually spurs me to action is the knowledge that you're in the hospital now.
Yeah.
And thus I should go to the hospital to visit you. So that idea of now is a tensed concept that just doesn't exist on a tenseless view. So at some point I need to know that 1 a.m. is now, and so that's why I need to go visit you.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Okay.
So clearly, the statement that Breckan is in the hospital now has a different meaning, or carries some different meaning than Breckan is in the hospital at 1 a.m., even if 1 a.m. is now.
Okay.
Does that make sense? Yeah. Okay. So another good example of how absurd this view comes from, so if you just think about knowing what time it is. So Dr. Craig gives this example in his book, and he says, take the example, it is now 4:30. Now, clearly this belief means something that cannot be expressed tenselessly. So the tenseless version of this statement, because, it says now. So now doesn't exist there's no privileged now on the B theory. So the tenseless version of the statement would either be it is 4:30 at 4:30, which, doesn't give us any information, right? It's just a tautology.
Yeah.
Or it is 4:30 simultaneous with this utterance, which doesn't really tell us anything unless we know that this utterance is occurring now, which is a tense statement. And, there are other problems with this view, but we're going to move on to a more interesting solution, the new tenseless theory of language.
All right.
Nobody holds to this view anymore. There's no philosophers that defend it. They've all realized these issues that it has. So, that's the old tenseless theory of language. But now we're going to get on to the new one. So the difference between these two escape routes is that while the old theory claimed that tensed sentences can be translated into tenseless sentences, the new theory doesn't make that claim. It rather makes the claim that tensed sentences can be given tenseless truth conditions, which are just the conditions under which a sentence is true. So that's a different idea than a just translation of a tenseless sentence. So they're perfectly fine saying, yeah, tenseless sentences and tense sentences carry different meanings, but the truth conditions that surround tensed sentences can be given tenselessly.
Okay.
Does that kind of make sense?
I feel like I could hold to this theory better, for sure.
Right. It's a much more sophisticated theory, but I think we're going to see why it doesn't work. This idea is most famously formulated by a guy named D.H. Mellor, who holds that a present tense sentence token. So a sentence token, I've thrown this word around a little bit, it's just an utterance of a sentence. So if I were to say, it is 10:51, that is a sentence token. But if I were to say, it is 10:51, if I were to say that again, that is a different sentence token, but it's of the same type. Does that make sense? They're the same sentence, they express the same fact, but it's a different token of that. Does that kind of make sense?
Yeah.
Difference between token and type?
Yeah.
Okay. So, Mellor holds that a present tense sentence token is true if and only if that token occurs at the time of the event it describes. So if I were to say that token at the same time that the event that I'm talking about happens, that's when it's true. So and then a past tense sentence token is true if and only if that token occurs at a specified time later than the event described, and so on. The future tense token is true if and only if the token occurs at a specified time earlier than the relevant event. So if you had the sentence, it is now 1980, and then call some token of this sentence S, S is true if and only if S occurs in 1980. So say I were to say it is now 1980, that sentence is only true if I said that in 1980. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
But if I were to say it, or if that sentence token were to occur sometime else, it would not be true. So that's what I mean by the truth condition, whatever makes that thing true. So clearly these two sentences don't mean the same thing, but S occurs in 1980 states the tenseless truth conditions for S. Okay. Hopefully that sort of makes sense. So that's kind of the theory. So what can be said about this theory? Well, first of all, it kind of violates the laws of logic, which, is sort of a big no in philosophy. That's not a thing you should be doing, really, in any part of life, but particularly philosophy. So the reason for this is that sentence tokens of the same type can't have different truth conditions. That doesn't really make any sense for that to be the case. So suppose you took two different tokens of the 1980 sentence I talked about earlier. One of the tokens implies its own truth condition. So say you take a token S that says it is now 1980. Well, it implies the truth condition S is true if and only if S occurs in 1980, right? So that's an implication.
Okay.
But then you took another token, R, which also says it is now 1980. So it's the same. It's the same type, but different tokens of it. That would imply that R is true if and only if R occurs in 1980. Well, the S would imply the truth condition of, S is true if and only if S occurs in 1980, but it wouldn't imply the truth condition that R is true if and only if R occurs in 1980. But both tokens have to be logically equivalent to each other because they're of the same type. Does that make sense?
Oh man, you're starting to lose me. All right.
So, if we are going to say that different tokens can have different truth conditions, then that leads to logical impossibilities because different tokens express the same fact.
Okay.
Right? So R and S are essentially expressing the same fact. But if we're going to treat them as propositions expressing different facts, then they don't imply the same truth conditions, but that doesn't make any sense for the same proposition. So the same proposition has to have, the one truth condition. It can't have two different truth conditions. It can't have two different things that make it true.
I get that. I'm trying to play devil's advocate here and trying to decide if that's necessarily true.
Well, I mean, it's pretty well accepted by philosophers. Most have abandoned this version.
Okay.
So, just you can't have truth conditions of tokens.
Okay.
It has to be types. It doesn't really make sense to say that. And it also doesn't say anything about tensed sentences that are never uttered, right? So obviously we want to say that a certain sentence type is true in the Jurassic Age, namely, it is now the Jurassic Age, right? Even though nobody would be around to say it.
Okay.
Right? So there's nobody that exists in the Jurassic Age saying it is now the Jurassic Age. Well, this theory doesn't seem to account for that, right? There wouldn't be any truth conditions that apply to that because nobody's actually said it. No, there's obviously more that could be said about this, but, we don't have time.
Ayo. All right.
Oh, time jokes. Love it. So, if you're still with us, this next one's not as bad. That one took me so long to understand, but I think I do now. So let's look at one more argument for the A theory, which is basically just an argument from our own experience of time. So essentially, this argument boils down to an argument that since we seem to experience objective temporal becoming, then, and if you remember back to temporal becoming, it's things actually coming into and out of being.
Okay.
Then in the absence of any undercutter of this belief or any reason not to hold to it, then we ought to hold to it to be objectively true. And the argument kind of goes like this. So premise 1, belief in the objective reality of the distinction between past, present, and future is properly basic. And that just means we're justified in believing in it, absence of any external justification. So we don't need to look for any reasons. It's just, it can be part of our, building blocks of our knowledge. And that's a fairly commonly accepted theory of knowledge, that there are properly basic beliefs because we have to start somewhere at least. And this would be one of those beliefs. And so premise 2, if our belief in the objective reality of the distinction between past, present, and future is properly basic, then we are prima facie justified in holding this belief. I think that's how you say that. And so therefore we are prima facie justified in holding our belief in the objective reality of the distinction between past, present, and future. And
okay, Mr. Logic here. What does prima facie mean?
It's like on the surface.
Okay.
So like if we weren't to dig any deeper, it seems true.
Okay.
Right. So premise 2 is basically just true by definition of a properly basic belief. If it's a properly basic belief, then we're justified prima facie.
Okay.
So we could have properly basic beliefs that are wrong, but if we don't have any reason to think they're wrong, then they still count as knowledge.
Interesting.
And that's part of a whole theory of knowledge that I think is called foundationalism.
I'm really prone to argue against prima facie knowledge then. The way you've described it. Now it may be described
tell you why you're wrong.
Otherwise, but yeah.
I've looked into it and it seems necessary, but we can get into that in a different time.
Okay.
But it's not necessarily important. So premise 2 is basically just true by that definition. So premise 1 then, I think premise 1 speaks to our temporal experience as we really do seem to experience things as past, present, and future. So for example, let's say my finger got a paper cut while, handling my outline, right? Well, then it's true that I experience myself to be currently in pain, right? Now, in 2 weeks or so, when that cut is healed, I experience that the pain has subsided. But on the tenseless view, the pain hasn't really subsided. It's merely being tenselessly experienced by me on a different point on the space-time block. I would argue that this doesn't really speak to our experience at all, right? Like, my feelings of relief, anticipation, or grief would be irrational on the tenseless view, since the events that cause them are not really past, present, or future. They're just located differently on the space-time block. Does that make sense?
Depending on your perception of the view, I would say.
Well, okay, wouldn't you say that well, here, let me give you one more example. So this experience, I think, is really just so intuitively obvious, and I don't think we have a powerful defeater for this belief. So let's take this example. Many of you probably wished it was Friday this past week, right? If the tenseless theory of time is true, then the statement, I wish it was Friday, is, actually an irrational statement, right? What you would really want to say is, I wish the Friday of the week of January 15th through the 19th was on January, 15th rather than January 19th.
Okay.
Is that really what you're wishing for? Well, I don't think so. I think you're actually wishing that today was Friday.
Interesting.
It just seems to me that we have a powerful intuition about the objective reality of temporal becoming, and it lacks a strong defeater, and thus we're justified in our contention that time is tensed. Does that make sense? So, to say, I wish it was Friday, which is to say, I wish now was Friday, that doesn't make any sense on a tenseless theory of time. You would be irrational in saying that. You would be saying, I wish my current person, or who I am now, or not now, I wish I was located on a different part of the space-time block. But I don't think that's what we mean.
Well, it may be how we perceive it, but
that's what this argument is arguing.
It may be how we perceive time, but it's simply an illusion that we describe time in this way. Like, you keep using dates, which are a way for us to arbitrarily describe time. Mm-hmm. So how can we justify using stating a date and then saying, well, I wish Friday was at this arbitrarily defined time?
I don't think we do, because I don't think that's what we think. I think what you're hung up on is that I'm using an argument from our experience, and you're saying, well, that doesn't prove anything to be true. And you're technically right, it's logically possible that we're wrong. But I'm saying, in the absence of another reason to think that our experience is illusory, we ought to accept our experience. So, for example, our experience tells us that we have existed, or I've existed for 22 years. You've existed for, I guess almost 23 years now in this life. But that's not to say that it's not logically possible that we actually were created 10 minutes ago with, meals that we never ate and, beer we never drank, just in our bellies.
True.
That's a logically possible view.
Okay.
But in the absence of any reason to think that to be the case, I think we're justified in believing that we actually have lived all this time.
Okay, so it comes...
And that's what this argument tries to say.
And it comes in with the Prima Facie argument, right? Okay.
Right. And so what the B theorist would need to say is, here are reasons to think that our experience of time isn't accurate. So, we're experiencing time differently than how time actually is.
So even if it is possible that a B theory of time exists, just because of our experience of what we would call an A theory of time, and I hate the word common people, but most people would think that we're on an A theory of time from what you've described.
Yeah. Right.
You're saying that even though it is possible that we're on a B theory of time, we have not experienced that type of time.
That's not what our experience
that's not our
reflects.
Yeah, exactly.
And so if the B theorist can't provide, a logical or scientific reason to think that the B theory of time is true, then the A theory ought to be our default position.
Okay.
Is basically what we're saying.
Okay.
And B theorists do offer, rebuttals to this argument. Or I guess not, I don't know specifically. Well, I mean, sure they do rebut this argument, but, just with arguments for the B theory, obviously. But if you don't find any of those convincing, then this argument says, yeah, you're actually justified in thinking the A theory is true.
Okay.
So those are the two primary arguments for the A theory of time, and I find them really convincing, just because I don't find the B theory of time that convincing, and I don't. There's also moral issues with the B theory, which I'll get into when we talk about the B theory. But yeah, so some argue that our experience of time is illusory and thus ought not be trusted, but I haven't really found any of those accounts to be particularly convincing. And so that's kind of why I hold to an A theory of time. So, but looking into the nature of time is actually just super interesting, and I hope you guys have seen that it kind of starts to blow your mind the more you look at it. You think you understand time really, really well until you think of all these different paradoxes that might occur, and then it's just a whole can of worms, and then next thing you know, you're out $400 on books on time.
Ayo.
But that's a different story. I promise you're never going to think about it the same once you start studying it. So on my next episode, we're actually going to look at some arguments for the B theory of time and talk about it in order to give it its due. Now, obviously, there are arguments both for and against both theories, but I didn't really have time to get into the against arguments. I figure both sides just have their arguments in favor, and we can just let it rest at that.
Okay.
But yeah, that's the A theory of time, guys.
Wow. So much
hurts.
to go through, and it's late at night. It's 11 o'clock when we're recording this at night. Some of you are like, "Oh, that's early," and then some of you are like, "How are you still up?"
Yep, that's me.
Yeah. I go like I am a subscriber to the A theory of time because I've heard arguments and everything, and my chips are bet on the A theory of time is what I would say.
Right.
But the B theory of time has always intrigued me because it involves higher sciences, like general relativity, right?
Theorists.
Yeah, relativity and stuff. And Albert Einstein, even though he has some, there are anecdotes involving Albert Einstein that are included in things that this is an apologetic thing. So for arguments for the existence of God or a God, if you're a the word is deist or what's the fancy word for them? Yeah, like they don't know. Oh, agnostic. Wow, man, can't think of words tonight apparently.
Okay.
The arguments
there's
arguments for God
applications.
Involve an A theory of time, and maybe for an agnostic you could say a B theory of time exists, but a lot of arguments require an A theory of time, and certain other special proponents within philosophy, and it's so interesting to hear that, and I love to subscribe to a B theory of time just to try and think my way out of God's existence, because and it sounds weird as a Christian to say that, but I want to think my way out of it to think my way back into it, and that's the method behind a good philosopher.
Right.
So
yeah. Well, I think because you're more of a scientific guy than me, and I think that's why a lot of scientists subscribe to a B theory, just because the science is more mainstream for a B theory. It's not to say that A theorists can't accept the mainstream. I think you just have to take a different interpretation of relativity.
Definitely.
But I think scientists lack the philosophical training to make some of these judgments. They don't think about the philosophical side of
the
different theories of time.
The effects of having and it's also a scientifically backed argument. The effects of having an infinite regress of events.
Yeah, that would be a no-go on the theory, for sure.
It brings us back to the beginning of the universe, which even for a subscriber for the Big Bang Theory, which I am, within a creationist standpoint,
right.
The idea that we have events that come back to one point would state that, like, at some point we have to have some sort of like a theory of time, or like the time.
Right.
Time is so strange.
I'm not sure that. Here's just a quick little tangent before we wrap up. I'm not, and I've just been thinking about this a bit lately. I'm not convinced that the Big Bang Theory really makes sense on a B theory of time.
Yeah,
because nothing really, like, it all just, like, there's no real beginning. Like, it's just,
and there wouldn't have to be.
It's all there. Like,
yeah.
The Big Bang, the point in time that the Big Bang started still exists on the B theory of time. And so I'm not sure how you could really even call it a Big Bang. It's just like, I don't know. It doesn't really make sense to me, but I don't know. That's just my own thoughts.
It's block 1700 of the space-time, and you decided an arbitrary point to describe it from there,
Exactly.
Yeah. it's
that was fun.
It's a great, for anyone who's made it this far, and if Scott doesn't like cut this out, this has been a great episode for those who are philosophically trained, and for those who want to like understand why maybe both of us, both Scott and I, are really into philosophy. Understanding
this is what got me into
understanding time is a weird subject. Ask yourself the question, what is time? Like literally, without picking up a dictionary, because the dictionary is useless on this subject, literally try to define time. Get out a pencil and a piece of paper and try and define it, and you will come up emptier than you've ever felt in your life.
Or use like a computer, like a normal person. It's
pen or pencil on paper is how I prefer to write things.
So I'm gonna write all of my philosophy books.
Yeah.
Yep.
Send them in to the editor just for them to.
Yep. They're gonna publish them just that way.
Yeah.
No, actually, I'm not even gonna get them published. I'm just gonna write multiple copies by hand.
There are copiers. I mean, you don't have to go into the dark ages.
Right, I'll hire a few interns to handwrite them.
There you go. That sounds classic. All right, before this gets...
That's probably a good place to wrap it up. Send us some suggestions at thebestwaytoexplainit.com/suggestions. Show notes for this page will be bestwaytoexplainit.com/27. And read those books by Dr. Craig. He's a sharp guy, and you'll probably get something out of him, even if you disagree with him.
Definitely.
I know I always do. And with that being said, we will talk to you next time.
And get learning.